It's after 7 and our guest speakers are here. So I'm going to welcome everyone to the Village Laguna January meeting. And I've really been looking forward to this report. We have the co-chairs of the Housing and Human Services Committee with us. And I was going to ask each of them to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to be on that committee, because it looks like a lot of hard work to me. And of course, you're young, maybe you're better at it. But anyway, we have Alex Renagi and Laura Sowers. Did I say those right? I hope. And if not, please correct me.
Yeah, you're great.
And so let's start with Laura. Will you want to tell us a little bit about you and your committee?
Yes, I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to tell you everything I have to tell you right off the bat. And I joined the committee, I think it's three and a half years ago. I do, for about 20 years, I've been doing disaster mental health for people who have home fires or disasters either in California or nationally. And I started to cover both Orange County and Riverside. And I had never spent so much time coaching people on.
Yeah, I need to give up.
I'm going to wait till this person
Okay,
goes on mute.
Let's make sure everybody's muted, please. Sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I never struggled so hard helping people find housing, people with jobs, people who had consistent housing and really struggled. And so that kind of forced me into looking at the issues that were coming up around housing. So that's in a nutshell. And the committee has gone great in the last 3 years. We've had brilliant people join, some really high level expertise. So the conversation has gotten much more complex, but also exciting to do. And I'm going to give you the whole spiel now. Why do I think I or other community members should spend our spare time looking at affordable housing? I really believe that it's part of having a healthy community and a healthy ecosystem. And to me, this means that people in our town have people who can provide services to our community and enrich our experience living here, very similar to the experience I've had. I've been your neighbor for 20 years now. Just had a variety of people in my town to turn to with a variety of income levels and a variety of professionals. And I found that very enriching, and I want to keep that going if possible. I think it's important to have some of the people who work in Laguna live in Laguna. And I've seen less and less of that. And I think if we can get people to live small in ADUs and have small affordable housing development, redevelop properties, have workforce housing, senior specific projects, young professionals, we will have the best people working in our town. And working disaster mental health, it's really important to me to look at emergency personnel living in our town, healthcare workers, critical city staff. And I don't just mean the administrative staff, I mean public workers who can turn things off if we have that earthquake or that disaster, that fire. But also other needed professionals that we're seeing less and less of come into our town. Contractors, teachers, small business owners. And I'm going to talk before Alex, because he's going to get into the weeds and the details. So before he does that, I want to talk to you all about how, as a layperson, I really understood what affordable housing has to look like in Laguna. And the way I see it is, let's use the analogy of we have a hub and we have the spokes. And so the first spoke is building housing. And this is the one we talk about a lot, building housing on city-owned sites. And these were the options that were recently presented by Commissioner Kellenberg to the City Council. So I'm assuming many of you have listened to that or read about it. The second spoke are sites that are included by city staff in the housing element to meet HCD requirements. And many of you might already know this, but I want to point out the City Council has approved our draft six cycle draft housing element. that is created by staff, but it still needs to be certified by HCD. So it's not a done deal yet. These two options are going to drastically increase our affordable housing units in town, but they are also very, very difficult to achieve and very expensive. So that is something we'll have to deal with. I do want to point out the housing element looks at a variety of data points, and we tend to focus on the site identification, but there's another really important part to the housing element, and that is the program and policy part of the housing element. And right now, those have been defined, but I think for community members, the way we might get more input or actually make what's been created into something that's viable is to look at those programs and policies and say, how can we have maximum public outreach, very, very specific programs, clear timetables on when things will be achieved, and measurable outcomes. So I would suggest we don't get distracted just by site identification, but we really look at those programs and how staff will implement those. We have to remember those programs will have to be consistent with our general plan. And I just, maybe Alex can talk about that a little bit more, but that's an important piece. Okay. The next hub would be ADUs and other programs that will give us a smaller, not in mass, but more affordable housing units. And Cody Engel and Jackie Shafkin from our committee have worked tirelessly on this, and they've done a great job. I hope that ADUs can increase our stock of affordable housing. They inherently will be more affordable because of the size. Another area in this spoke is things like path to compliance for illegal units, which we don't have a program for right now, but that would be another way we could bring more units into town. The fourth spoke would be infill and redevelopment. And I think this is another place where we could see some success. I love infill because it gently integrates affordable housing throughout the community, which is a model that will serve our town the best, will preserve the feel of our town. And maybe I am a daydreamer, I am an idealist, an optimist, but I really would like us to look at infill. Examples of infill that haven't happened, but I wish had. The Art Hotel went up for sale. If we had an entity that had an ability to purchase something like that and turn it into senior housing, so we get maybe, I'm just guessing, 20 or 25 senior affordable housing units. I think recently a 5-plex, it's either for sale or went for sale on Chiquita in North Laguna. And that would be, if we had a vehicle for purchasing a property like that, doing small 5-plex, 4-plex, where we integrate affordable housing into town. Vista Aliso, which got a lot of conversation in the last city council meeting, is an example of redevelopment and infill housing that to me is pretty exciting because it's viable. It's already senior affordable housing. And the current partner, which is National Church Residences, NCR, is a very willing partner. So those are all examples of redevelopment. The last spoke would be creating an affordable housing trust, which there has to be an entity that's capable of doing some of these things. And that's where the housing trust comes in. Okay. So let me see what else I have here. That might be about it for my introduction. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is that our committee hasn't done a lot of advocating for this, but I know the city is coming up on their next budget. And as you can see, if you look at this project of city-owned sites, housing element identified sites, ADU loan programs, infill redevelopment, it's a lot. I don't think it will get achieved by us. good-hearted or good-meaning community members, I think that our city will have to look at a designated revenue stream, at setting aside funds in order to make this happen. And we really, there are loans out there. There's the LIHTC loans. There's programs for ADU loan programs, but I think we would need a set aside staff member with really high level of expertise in order to successfully tap that. So that's my thoughts in a nutshell, an introduction, and maybe we can move to Alex.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. I think you said it, everything that you articulated really well, what our committee's been talking about for a long time and all the different pathways that we're looking at. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Alex Renagi. I'm a lifelong resident of Laguna Beach. And I joined this committee because when I came back from college, I realized that the community that I grew up in, the place where I went to school at El Moro with, kids whose parents were nurses and teachers, that's really been eroding over time. And I also think about our elders and our senior population. I live next to my grandma, and it's so important that we have a community that really cares for our seniors and takes care of them and makes it at a place where we have assisted living care for our seniors to go to. And we're a place where the people who maybe didn't buy houses here back when it was a lot cheaper to buy houses here, that they don't get priced out of the community because the landlord keeps increasing the rent. So I think that's really important. And I just want to quickly, before I start talking about the housing element, I read the Vision Laguna 2030 strategic plan. And it's such an interesting document because of the way that it was created with so much community input. And so in the document, it says, we will honor, this is the guiding principle, the overarching vision for Laguna Beach is defined as the following. We will honor the diversity that defines Laguna Beach as an eclectic mix of people with varying interests, incomes, occupations, and stages of life. So I really believe in that. And I think that many of you probably do too. And I just want to say that I think the Housing and Human Services Committee, the people who I've served with on that committee, we all believe in that vision. And that's why we and so many others, including many on this call, are passionate about real housing solutions to retain the social fabric of our community. So back to the housing element. So as you all know, the housing element is a mandated component of the general plan. Every 8 years, the California Housing and Community Development Department has to approve every jurisdiction's housing element. And as I wrote in a column back in the summer, this year is different. The state has stepped up the penalties, and they've really turned it from being an exercise where people just have to check boxes and kind of write out a housing element that doesn't really mean much. Now it's a real document, and the state has real enforcement powers. So if you've been to any of our meetings, I know Anne's on the call, she's been to a couple, and Janet and George and others have seen, members of our committee have not been shy about sharing our problems with the 6 cycle housing elements process and approach. And we would have preferred a process based on diligent community outreach, feasible housing sites, and a highly specific and strategic plan of action. And in our opinion, the housing element fell short of that because fundamentally there was a disconnect from the beginning of the process. The goal was to check boxes and to comply with state law, not to engage in good faith efforts about the city's trajectory in delivering the housing solutions our community so desperately needs. So I think that the next step, and I talked about all this at the city council meeting, is figuring out how we can turn the broad programs that the housing element outlines and turn them into, through community engagement, turn them into a real specific plan of action for how we can find solutions and kind of bring the community along, because we don't want this to just be city staff and them kind of determining the future of Laguna Beach. We want, as a part of that, the general plan, what I've really learned a lot about is we don't have a real general plan in Laguna Beach. We have parts of the general plan that have been updated since I've been, the circulation element hasn't been updated since I've been alive. And so I think it's important that we really go back, because the general plan is where the community has an opportunity to be involved in the process. And that's sort of what guides staff every day at City Hall. So I think that that's really one of the things I've learned from this housing element process. And so one of the things is we want more community input about some of the solutions. And I can briefly talk about a couple of the ideas that we've talked about. And it's also mentioned in the housing element. a local housing trust fund with a permanent revenue stream, ADU forgivable loan programs, incentives with a path to compliance for ADUs, changes to our inclusionary policy, incentives to promote housing and assisted living facilities for our seniors, adaptive reuse, and Laura talked about others. And so ultimately, I think we're kind of tired of the idea of, we've done a lot of like task force reports and where everyone gets all excited and there's all these like broad ideas in these reports, and then they just go and sit on the, and a lot of community members spend a lot of time putting input into them, and then they just go and collect dust on a shelf. We're not really interested in that anymore. And so we're looking forward to, over the next couple of weeks and months, figuring out what it is, how we can, like I said earlier, turn the broad programs of the housing element into a really specific plan of action. And so that's why we're here, is we want your input on that. And we want to be collaborative and really find real solutions that can bring the community together. I think I'll just go back to kind of what I started with. The soul of Laguna, I think, is it's people, and we don't want that to go away. We want to retain a community where people from all walks of life can be a part of Laguna Beach, the Laguna Beach that we all love. And so I think the housing trust, that's really something, and I've had conversations with many of the people on this call about that. That's really, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think I'll stop talking. I don't know if Laura, if you have anything else to add, but maybe we can hear questions or input from you about how we move forward and find housing solutions to address our community's needs.
Well, I just want to add to what you're saying. As you all know, committee members have limited scope in our influence, but one thing, we harp on a lot, and we hope to see more of, is this community input, and we don't have to make this up. Laguna doesn't have to recreate, how do we do community input on, for instance, the housing element or our human services or any other issue, really. I mean, HCD around housing has a ton of information on their website on what really good community input looks like. They have an example that the city of Richmond, I don't even know where that is, but had a plan van, a cool looking van where the planning department went to different community groups and fairs and farmers markets, so that they were out there getting community members input, not just folks who are part of a set like Can Do or Village Laguna, but just general community members input, and that they went and got the input from people who actually need the housing, so that the housing plan, affordable housing plan, is not just created by people with expertise or city staff, but it's actually created with input from the individuals who need the housing. And I just want to, I think everybody knows this, but I want to point out, those are people who are long-term renters in our community, who are seniors now that we have had as school secretaries or teachers or long-term members of the communities. Those are people who, like Alex, who grew up in our community, and we're lucky enough that he's coming back to town to share his smarts and hard and civic engagement. Those are young professionals trying to enter our community. So there's a whole host of people that, anyway, I just want to say that we don't have to look very far on how to really increase that community input piece.
And I see a question from Deborah. How do we get affordable, not by Laguna Beach standards, but by OC standards, rents on ADUs? $3,000 a month is a stiff price for many seniors, artists, or in-town workers. If ADUs have forgivable fees, then shouldn't their owners pass that kindness along to renters? I totally agree. So I think what we've looked at is programs. So in Santa Cruz, they have a program where they give you a forgivable loan over a 10-year period, and every year you get a percentage of that loan forgiven for ADUs, as long as you rent it at an affordable rate to someone who qualifies. So that's something that we're looking at for Laguna with the housing trust. If we can create a dedicated revenue stream, we can do a forgivable loan program that can help maybe fixed income seniors who don't have enough money to do an ADU. They don't have enough cash to do an ADU under normal circumstances, but with a forgivable loan, they could do that. And then they could rent it to someone who, like an artist or someone else who's low income, and it could be a win-win situation. So that's something that we're definitely looking into.
I don't know how often you have speakers, but I mean, we have to be very thankful to Jackie Shapkin and Cody Engel, who have done the ADU line share of the work for our committee. But I think it'd be great to invite them at some point, and they could really take you down all the different, because they've been researching programs from all different cities on how to increase ADUs.
Could you tell us their names? Oops.
Oh, that's Jackie Shapkin. She's a member of our committee. And you can look on the website under our committee and it'll have all the committee members. So that's Jackie and Cody Engel. They have really, the level of detail they've had to go to look at best practices for ADUs from similar towns is incredible. And they've provided some very, very detailed, excellent recommendations to the city planning department. So I don't want to volunteer for them, but
Yeah, thank you. Okay, questions?
Well, I have a sort of a general question. This is to both Alex and Laura. I'm just curious as how do you feel about working on your committee, working with the city staff in terms of moving your agenda forward?
That's a good question.
maybe Alex, you could talk about some of our goals for the next year.
Well, I think that the problem is that we don't have a real, when we have all these broad, like when our general plan and our housing element has all these broad programs, then it leads a lot of, in terms of setting the agenda and figuring out what the priorities are, it leaves a lot of leeway, I would say, for kind of city staff to determine when they want something to be heard or when they want a program to be implemented. And so I think our goal is going forward is to try to be more specific about when we're talking about our, like, a strategic plan or the housing element or any of these different kind of agenda setting mechanisms. We want to be more specific so that our input and the community's input can kind of be what's implemented, because otherwise it's in our experience, it's been difficult to kind of move forward if the terms are not really ours to decide, if that makes sense.
Meg?
Yeah, I have a suggestion for you as a past design review board member. A lot of times people who are appointed to these committees and commissions feel that they need to, that they are directed by staff. That's not true.
No.
You can tell staff what to do. That's your job. So,
well, just watch one of our meetings and I think you'll see that we don't. Yeah, but I agree.
no, I mean, just put it
Meg,
on
we're
their-
getting in plenty of trouble already.
Good.
Don't worry about it.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because they work for you. You don't work for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we haven't had a problem doing that, but I appreciate you saying that, Meg.
Okay.
Okay, I see George has his hand up. George?
Thank you. I just had a comment. I want to congratulate you too for the work you're doing. I support all of the solutions you've described here today. And I did serve on the Housing and Human Services Committee for 2 years in 2014-15. And that time I made the acquaintance of Bill Whitty, and he came to one of our meetings. And then I subsequently got him to do help with the Housing and Human Services on some of these projects, to do the pro forma and to guide those projects a bit. He's still someone I think we can count on, even though he doesn't live here only half the time. But I wanted to make a comment about the revenue sources. The city certainly can distribute more money, put more money into the housing fund, and there's $700,000 there now for perhaps small programs that can be developed to support ADUs. And also there's a budget meeting coming up that we might contribute more to that.
Yeah.
But the housing fund, it doesn't need to be a partnership between private sources and public sources. On the public side, what I've said is that we need a source of revenue. And I looked at one that is taxation on homes that are purchased by people who don't live here and don't rent the home out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's recently a sale of $70 million in Smith Cliffs for a house that a New York couple purchased for $70 million. and it's a vacation home. They're taking away housing, so I think it would justify us to create a small transaction tax that funds a housing fund. And that money could be then given to projects, worthwhile projects. But on the other side of it, there does need to be a housing trust, and there needs to be a champion found to lead that, and then to have contributions made by people who have money, who want to see Laguna, as you said, Laura, keep the workers here, the school workers, the people who work anywhere in town, who are artists, who work at bars and restaurants, just the workforce. And that right now we have 38%, I think, of our housing stock is rental. And we lost 15 units of low income affordable housing in 2000 with the project by the Chase Manhattan Bank. So we need to do more. And I haven't been involved in the committee directly, but in the background, I have been working to help. And thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you. Armando?
We really appreciate that, George.
Armando?
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Yeah, this is always interesting to see young people so interested in carrying on the tradition of Laguna. It reminds me of when I first came to Laguna many years ago. And so congratulations. So the question I have is, can we build affordable housing in gate-guarded areas like Emerald Bay or Triage Bay? Is that possible? Does the law allow us to go in there and say, hey, we need that would be nice.
I have no idea. I can't answer that.
I don't know. Well, Emerald Bay, I guess, isn't Laguna Beach, right? So I don't know about that, but it's unincorporated, I think.
Yes.
But I don't know. You might have, Armando, you might be getting yourself into a fight here. So I might stay away from that.
I think Armando can do it, but I don't think we can.
Yeah, I love fights, so that's why I'm raising the issue. But okay, then let me ask a second question.
Go ahead.
Okay. There's an artist live work space being built in the canyon. All right. You guys, is that affordable housing to you, to the committee? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, I know that I think eight of the units are deed restricted affordable for low income for 55 years.
What would be considered low affordable?
I'd have to look at the numbers for Orange County, but it's 30% of the of what's considered low income in Orange County. 30% of the income would qualify. So I have to look at the specific numbers, and I could get that data for you. But so 8 of the units for that project are. I don't think that's something that we're, in terms of like city-owned sites or any of the other sites we're looking at, we're not looking at anything like that. And I think that the reason why is because in the M1A and M1B zone of the canyon, you can't do any, there's no residential that's permissible. And so under the current zoning, and also the second part is that for affordable, you need to be close to resources. So you need to be able to like walking distance to a pharmacy or to different amenities. And so projects like that wouldn't work because you wouldn't be able to get tax credit financing because it's so far away from amenities.
Thank you. Janet, did you have your hand?
Oh, can I answer a little? One thing about your about the gated communities, they can do ADUs because I think the law supersedes their community rules. That's my understanding. And the other thing I just wanted to jump on your comment, and that's back to my pitch for infill housing, is creating affordable housing in all areas of town, not pushing it out to the edge of town or pushing it all into one, whether it's South Laguna or the Canyon or North Laguna, that we really look at models where we integrate it throughout town.
Janet?
Yeah, I just had a question for Alex in terms of the 8 units out at the Louis Longy. Out of how many units? Do you know? I should know, but I don't.
My understanding is that there are 30 units and then 8 are deed restricted for low income.
Thank you.
Wow, 30 units. Okay.
Gene,
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Gene has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Jean?
Yes, thank you very much. The Dornan Investment Group monstrosity in the canyon was reduced to 28 units. The question I have is that one of the things the city recently did was to change the downtown specific plan to allow second stories with the idea that that might be residential. But we have 7 miles of coast highway. And unless it's been changed, there was a restriction on second stories on coast highway of a maximum of 50% of the second stories being residential. Could you discuss how many units that might produce if that restriction was removed?
I don't know the number of how many units that could produce, but I know that it would be a lot of units. And I think to me that, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. It's not the committee's opinion, but that rule doesn't make a lot of sense because I think that there's a lot of opportunities for residential along Coast Highway just on a second story. And if it's like right now you're allowed to do an office space on the second story, but you're not allowed to do residential, which to me, I don't, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know what other people's opinion on that is. So I don't know what the number is, Gene, but I could look into that and get back to you.
Well, I think it's, low hanging fruit.
Yeah, I agree. So that's something that I want to bring up in
the other low hanging fruit would be, if you have people, actually, I think Planning Commissioner George Dubin is living in a legal non-conforming residence and has for many years. He's probably not in any jeopardy, but other people living in legal non-conforming residences probably reluctant to step forward and to identify themselves as a low-cost housing that we currently have in Laguna Beach. And we ought to at least have some pressure from the committee to the city council that they ought to understand that there are hundreds of people in that situation. And there ought to be some situation that if they revealed themselves, that instead of getting into trouble, that there would be some mechanism to turn legal non-conforming low-cost housing into legal low-cost housing.
Well, we have been advocating for this, but it hasn't been addressed yet. This is the idea of path to compliance, that they have a program that brings illegal, let's call them illegal ADUs or illegal units, and then people aren't red tagged or financially
Where is that
the
being
same
done?
way. No, I mean, we brought it up multiple times. I mean, it's one of the goals of our
You
committee.
got to
but
find some city that's
we need
already
some
done it.
fire behind it to get it going.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of good models where you have an outside building inspector come in because people are afraid to show their illegal units to somebody from the planning department. So
I wanted to make a comment about the second story on Coast Highway. I know that Joe Hanauer has talked about building second story on the laundromat site that he purchased. And I don't know what he's doing with the laundromat, but that's certainly, I don't know that area is zoned for housing or not, but we do have a lot of second stories on houses, on office or retail spaces along Coast Highway. I looked at almost every one of them, and I have an inventory of them that exist today, because those units were all going to be recommended to be allowed to be ADU, not to be ADUs, but be short-term lodging.
Oh yeah.
All of them. And we stopped that, fortunately, because that would have gutted affordable housing that is on those sites. But I don't know about the zoning, Alex. I'll have to look into that.
Well, and I think I remember one of the problems with talking about like making what Gene talked about with the commercial zone is that we need to figure out a way to exempt that from turning into Airbnbs, because otherwise if we just allow it, they'd all turn into it. So if we could figure out a mechanism, I don't know.
There is a restriction on those, Alex. I have to tell you what we negotiated with finally with the Coastal Commission is approximately 300 units would be allowed to be converted, and most of those would be owners have to live there. So, and once you've reached that number, they're not going to take any more applications.
So are we at 300 or is there room for more?
I don't know, honestly. There was 130 historically that were exempted as grandfathered. And I know Village Laguna spent a lot of time and energy on preventing those from being in the R1 zone. They're only allowed in the mixed use and commercial zones. And they are apartments and houses. There's about 25 houses included in there. I have the inventory of that as well. But I think most of those were luckily just going to be apartments or homes, but the owner has to be there. Preventing party houses.
Yeah. So if we talk about like changing this rule for the commercial zone, I think it's important to figure out how that all works together and how we make sure. I mean, I think it would be cool if it could be owner occupied as opposed to just a second home, even if it's not an Airbnb, but I don't know. We have to look at the legality and everything involved with that. But
I mean, I would suggest that we all our committee is doing it because it's our assignment, but Village Laguna, read through the programs in the housing element, come up with very specific how you wish these programs would be defined and very specific implementation policies and timelines, because a lot of this will come out of those programs in the housing element. So that's my suggestion for the group. I know it's a lot of detail and it's hashing it out, but I think it's worth it.
Okay. No, excuse me. Other questions or comments? So you have just mentioned an idea about coming up with some specifics. Is there, I remember, I don't know, was it 20 years ago with the Vision 2020? There were things that went on down at maybe the farmer's market or in front of City Hall where they had groups who were interested in what was people wanted to do. Have you thought about doing any of that?
Well, I think that's a great idea. I feel like that should happen for like all parts of the city, not just housing, but like for really, we should do a deep dive on all aspects of the governance of the city to try to bring maybe a Vision 2040 or something. We can change the timeline, but I think I love that idea of doing something like that again.
I do too. Norman?
Affordable housing, as far as I know, it has to be subsidized, like Section H or something like that. And all the stuff I see, hear, and read, I never hear any mention about where the money is going to come from to subsidize the rent, leaving aside ADUs. But if you build an apartment house that's supposed to be for affordable housing, where do you get the subsidy?
Well, there's different options. I think for a lot of these city-owned sites, they've been talking about tax credit financing, where they would get I think that's from the federal government. Those funds would come from there. And then there's also talk about the Orange County Housing Authority has project-based vouchers that they allocate. So there could be applications there. And then I think what it ultimately will come down to is for the city to be willing to put up money. And that's kind of what where we talk about whether it's money from Airbnbs or what George was talking about. There does need to be some sort of a local funding source. So that's kind of one of the questions.
You're saying that it has to be raised. We not only are being asked to build affordable housing, but we're being asked to finance it ourselves. And the state who is ordering us to do this is not going to kick in any funds.
Well, I think there are a lot of state options out there, but so yeah, I guess to answer your question, there are state funding sources available. There's matching funds especially, but I think that ultimately there probably will need to be some sort of investment from the city, but I don't know the answer to that really.
I think it's an important question because it's easy to talk about putting up 2x4s and foundations and building something. But the developer's going to have a very strong assurance that that there's going to be subsidized renters.
Yeah, to your
There-
point, Norman, I think we've talked about short-term lodging. I have taking the short-term lodging tax, which is substantial. It's over $400,000 a year, but it's already allocated to other things. So we would have to make a budgetary switch to how we're going to make up for that 400,000 that goes into the general fund and move it to a housing fund for the city. So we provide tax revenue from a source that's continual, as Alex described. And so it's continual and adds up over time to make a substantial contribution to building the housing. Still, you need subsidies because those things are $425,000 a unit for 25 units is what we've seen from the pro formas. So, that's the problem. I mean, the downtown specific plan talks about housing and allowing for 36-foot heights in certain areas to provide housing and 24 feet in other areas, if you look at it. But it doesn't mention that those need to be affordable, and likely they wouldn't be.
Yeah, that's my point, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, George, and thank you, Alex. And there is tax credit financing. There's more state funds available now than there ever has been for affordable housing. But I'm just going to get back to my point that I think to have this done well, we would need a dedicated staff member with expertise to really look at all. There's everything we've heard from different cities we've talked to and different developers is that the way you do this is you're just layering all these different financing programs. And I don't think we're going to be able to do that well unless we have a dedicated staff member who has that expertise to look at all of that. And I think one of my concerns is that we might be putting the cart before the horse if we say, oh, we're going to identify this particular site without having that expertise to actually do that analysis ahead of time and say, this site will cost this much money. This infill program will cost this much money, because each one has different criteria that allows for different tax finance. I'm mumbling my words. Okay, you know what I'm trying to say, and different
Tax credit financing options.
Yes, thank you, and different loan programs. So I just think that's a danger that our town could get into if we get too far down the road with picking this site over this infill project. If we don't have somebody who's looking at each one, what programs they're eligible for, and it has to do with the population living there, and whether it's seniors, whether it's workforce, whether it's mixed, the level of affordability, is it the lowest level? There's all sorts of tiers. And also their access to services, how close they are to a pharmacy or grocery store or all sorts of other things. And that also will affect if we ever do build affordable housing, that will also affect things like, are we going to subtract people coming in and out of the canyon daily? Are we going to add to people coming in and out of the canyon daily? Are we going to subtract the amount of parking spaces used by our workforce? Or are we going to, there's all sorts of pieces to that. So I think I've said my spiel on that, but I do see that as a trap, and we want to be careful not to get into that. And
so do we need to begin lobbying the city council to hire someone? Is there a plan for that?
I'm going to answer this just as Laura Sowers, not as the committee, but I don't think we can do it. I think we have to have a designated person who can take the time to look at all that financing and see which financing each project is eligible for. And I just think we're going to have to do it.
Well, and that's my question. Should we be lobbying the city council to hire or to dedicate a staff person? How do we go about that?
Well, go ahead.
At the last, I think it was during our council goals process, we heard from the city council that they were, I think it was, the city council members were very open to that. So I think we're going to come up with a very specific proposal on that, and we would love any support. So I'll let you know about that, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you need the revenue stream to support the program itself,
Exactly.
along with the person. So I know, Alex, you wanted to do a housing workshop in March or so, and I'm happy to give me some dates, and I'll try to get Bill Whitty there, because Related Companies, the CEO, is the biggest builder of affordable housing in California, as well as doing standard mixed-use housing. And he helped quite a bit in doing those pro formas, which include the tax-based credits for where the project is and how big it is. And I'm sure he's willing to do that again.
That would be great.
Especially, he is a Laguna resident.
Yeah.
Thank you. Armando, is your hand still up, or is this just?
No, I was stretching. No, it's
Okay,
it's I'm going to be a smart ass again, like I did before, and raise maybe a difficult a point. So if you look at say Dana Point or Irvine or some of these cities around the areas, they're being built out. There's a lot of housing. I mean, I don't know how they're going to do it, but there's a lot of building going on. Just driving down to Dana Point the other day and looking behind the Denny's and all along Del Prado. I mean, there's a lot of housing. Frankly, I don't see a lot of affordable housing in there, right? I mean, that's my sense. So think about the concept would be carbon offsets, right? The government created this program of carbon offsets where a company can continue to pollute if they pay somebody else for or buy the carbon offsets. Why don't we do a housing offset? Why don't we start looking at talking to the cities in the periphery around us to say, Laguna is unique. We want to keep it, but we're willing to help you build affordable housing. We'll give you some of the money if you give us the credit for the units that are built out. Anyway, that's just a pie in the sky idea, but I thought I'd throw it out.
I think we've got more expertise maybe from Alex to answer this, but first of all, I think they already tried that, not necessarily Laguna, but other cities did try it and it didn't work. The state didn't allow it. And second of all, it sort of defeats the purpose of making our town a town that we have a variety of residents with a variety of incomes, and that we don't want more ghost homes. We don't want more of our housing to sit empty. We want an active, thriving community. And from a selfish level, we want nurses to work at the ER when we show up there. And I want some of our public works department to live in town, because I want somebody to turn off the gas and if there's a disaster. And we want, and then from an even more selfish level, we want to be able to go to restaurants and have it staffed. And so I think that's my pitch.
Well, Laura, of course.
So
I think everybody would love that, right? That's the ideal. But given the prices in Laguna, that's an amazingly high mountain to climb, to find the space, to find the money, to find the zoning, to create affordable housing. And I don't know, maybe after I'm gone, it'll happen, right? I'm just looking for a way to speed up the process, to get more people in Southern California who need affordable housing, because it's not happening anywhere in Laguna, in Newport, in Irvine, in Aliso, in Dana Point. I don't see it happening anywhere, frankly.
Okay, thank you. I see someone with just a phone number and last digits are 95, I think. I'm sorry, I see your hand up, but I don't know who you are.
Oh, hi, this is Karen Martin. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Karen.
Hi, thank you for calling on me. I heard Armando speaking and George, and I really thought they were great ideas, and just wanted to say, the housing element is just one element as part of the general plan. And when you connect all the elements, you actually can get a more balanced community. And Village Laguna has been such a great voice, and they've done so many wonderful things to preserve the charm and the character of our community. And I think when people are advocating for a certain idea, if when you're up at the podium speaking to the city council, when you point back to any of the elements of the general plan, you add teeth to your argument to support your idea. And if you look at the programs in the housing element, those programs in the housing element are supposed to connect to the circulation element and to the greenhouse gases element and to the cultural and historic preservation. So if we start as a community, start using that tool of the general plan, I think we will have a more consistent voice because we're pointing to something. But you may hear from staff and city council, they just voted a legislative agenda that basically says they want local control. For me, as a citizen, I want local control too, but I only want local control when it's the voices of the community, not just the voices of the city manager and maybe one city council member, but that we're heard. And I think the way we get heard is by pointing back to the general plan. So thanks for letting me speak.
Oh, thank you. Very good points. Barbara Metzger? You unmute yourself.
I think this is an opportunity that we haven't had as long as I can remember. We've never had this kind of thoughtful and energetic people on the housing committee trying to do something. And I think we need to try to strike while the iron is hot and build a groundswell of public opinion. I heard the city manager say at a council meeting once that housing is not a priority. And I think we should make it a priority. And there's never been a time like this before. Also, I had a question. If you could talk a little bit more about what a housing trust does and how that helps move the business ahead.
Alex, can you cover that? And maybe with that, could you outline our goals or what we're trying to achieve?
And thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate you saying that because it does get very, it's a lot of hard work that we've looked into this and stuff. So I really appreciate you saying that because we agree. I think now is the time to make something happen if it ever can. And then for a housing trust, the whole idea behind it, and really I think there's hundreds of different models of how a housing trust can be. What we really like about it is that it can be unique to the community. So there's so many different communities that have housing trusts and they're all different from each other. And so that's what I think we like about it, is that we can make it unique to Laguna. One of the main kind of things that we've seen for a housing trust is that you have a permanent revenue stream and you turn that permanent revenue stream from $1 into $5 or $1 into $8 by kind of leveraging the permanent revenue stream and using it to find other revenue sources, whether it's state grants or federal grants or private donations or people maybe donating their home when they die, different ideas. So I think there's really no definition of what a housing trust is. It's not an overly prescriptive idea, but it's something that we as Laguna residents can kind of come together and figure out what is it that we'd want this to look like, and then kind of model it based off of that. So that's really one of our, over the next year in our council approved work plan, the housing trust was one of our main goals, was kind of exploring that and having real community engagement where we could try to understand what are some of the low hanging fruit that we can do to make that happen, and how can we have it. So for example, there's one idea where people who have historic homes who want them to be preserved, they could in theory donate that home to a housing trust, and that could be a place for affordable housing, but it also could be a place to preserve the historic nature of the home. And so it's a way of combining different goals that the city has, or whether it could be like helping people put solar on their roofs. It could be a way to lower your costs while also promoting energy conservation. So I think there's different ideas that we can look at and be really creative about making a housing trust work for our community if it's something we want to pursue. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to take one last comment. I see Barbara Dressel has her hand up. And then we'll go on to we have two other topics.
Okay.
And you guys have really given us so much good information. Barbara?
Yes, thank you, Alex and Laura, for great information. So refreshing to know that we have people like you on these committees. This is a little bit off topic, but I would like to ask Alex how we get other young Lagunans involved. I know my daughter can't here, but the ones who are fortunate to want to maybe be able to live here or do live here, what can we do about that?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I think we have to make it as easy as possible and kind of and that starts with good proactive engagement. I think that if we make if the city can be more proactive about how we engage people and not just maybe having public comment shouldn't just be about having people show up to a hearing and testify, but also like being more proactive about engaging them, whether it's talking at the farmers market, like someone mentioned before like Anne mentioned with the Vision 2030. I think that that kind of engagement can kind of get people involved. And once you get a little bit involved, that's how you can get more involved. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question. I think having more housing options would probably be a good start for having more young people involved in Laguna. But I think that I think it has to be something that the city is proactive about doing, and it's not just going to happen naturally.
I'd like to see housing for young professionals. Our committee has just gotten approval to get a high school student on our committee. I would like there to be a high school student or even two on every single city committee. So we're just bringing them up from the ranks. Alex was on a committee when he was in high school. I think we were on the parking committee. And I think just starting that process, I also think we have to make sure that the young people who get on these, Alex is pretty tough. He sticks his neck out there, he gets backlash and just bounces back, kind of laughs, dusts himself off and gets back in the ring. But that doesn't mean that every young person is going to have that personality. Some will be great at research and some will be great at writing position papers and some will be good, as Alex is, on public speaking. But I think we have to be very kind and we have to make sure that whether it's staff or city council or planning commission or community members, that we show the young people respect when they come to our meetings, and we show that we value their contribution. And I mean, that's one of the reasons we wanted to get a high schooler in our committee, is we want to find out what young people think about. Do they think, oh, I'll have to leave this place and I'll never come back again, and I'll have to live in a different state than my family members? That's the only way, because I want to be something very valuable to society, like a PA or a therapist or a teacher or any of the things that aren't going to make $300,000 a year. And I just made up that number. It wasn't a very thought out well number. But anyway, the point is, I think we have to have programs in place that bring the young people into this civic engagement. And then we have to have people in town who make sure that they're respected through the process.
Thank you both for thinking about that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, I really have to thank both of you for all of the information for this evening and giving us a lot of things to think about. And I hope a lot of things to take action on. And we will look to you to give us some guidance on what we should be doing to better support your committee, because it's obviously doing great things and we appreciate it. We have just a couple more important announcements. that I'd like to, yes, thank you.
Thank you for the
everybody.
time. We really appreciate it, and we'll
Oh.
come back anytime.
Thank you so much. We really would like to.
Yeah.
Anne, you were going to talk about the historical, the Coastal Commission. If you could give us some update on that.
Yes, on February 10th, the Coastal Commission is going to be considering the historic preservation changes that the city has proposed. And the staff report is already available. We will be putting the link to that staff report on the Village Laguna website. We had Village Laguna and the Laguna Beach Historic Preservation Coalition had a meeting with city staff to go over the various, with coastal staff to go over the issues surrounding this whole issue. The main one being the insertion of owner consent as a criteria for defining what is historical or not. And we feel that, or we know that this is the crux of the problem with the ordinance as proposed by the city that's at the Coastal Commission. We did a lot of explanation about that, and it's very disappointing to see in that staff report that this coastal staff doesn't even address that change. They have examined some city documents that were produced about the historic program, the way the city intended to do it in 2017. And they quote from that document as though that's what the city is really proposing now, which it isn't. So in 2018, they changed course and inserted the provision that requires owner consent. And of course, that is not going to produce the same results as the program that they were outlining a year earlier. But somehow the coastal staff has bought into all these wonderful intentions that the city conveyed a long time ago, as though they are reality today. And I just have an example of what the whole idea of owner consent and how that's going to affect preservation at the counter, which is really the place where those decisions are made. And we had a house in our neighborhood which was not on the inventory, but was clearly a qualifier. And so the answer that I got when I talked to staff was, well, we asked them, are they interested in being on the historic register? And they said no, so we just didn't require a historic report. And that's exactly what's going to happen going forward if this provision requiring owner consent is adopted as part of the ordinance. So I would urge you to read that staff report. It's not that long, really. And then communicate with the Coastal Commission as soon as possible, because what the staff does is they produce an addendum to the report in maybe a week before the actual hearing. So they will often review the letters they've already gotten and most likely refute them, but possibly they will change some of the things that they're recommending in response to the letters that they get early on. So we'll be putting that information up on the Village Laguna website, and as many letters as we can get talking about the importance of effective preservation. It's interesting when you read the report that they've done, they have echoed our concerns about how important it is to preserve the historic character and the village character. They agree with all that. The problem is they don't understand that it won't happen with the way the city is approaching it. So that's what I would urge you to talk about in your letters. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Anne? This is really an important issue, and I really hope people will be thinking about this and participating. And you will have some information we could send out through our general mailing.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara.
And-
I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say, and somebody will send me the stuff to put on the website.
Yes.
ASAP, okay?
Yes.
And do I see any other hands up? Norman, is your hand up?
Yeah,
Norman?
what I'm hearing from you, Ann, is that the crux of the matter, the main thing is the owner's consent. That's 2 words.
Yes.
It seems pretty simple. They don't understand those 2 words, the Coastal Commission?
I guess not. I mean, I guess they understand it, but they don't understand how it will prevent historic preservation from really being implemented. They don't address it at all in the report.
So that would seem to me to be what we should emphasize in the letters we write.
Yes.
And if you'll give some ideas on what to write, I will send it out to our membership and encourage people to write about them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was important information. Barbara Metzger, you were going to talk about the downtown specific plan?
Right. Right. It's coming up at the council meeting. The Coastal Commission has decided on how they would like to approve the downtown specific plan and has presented some modifications, and they're coming up for the city council to approve tomorrow night. And I have no doubt that they will rubber stamp them.
Yeah.
Yep. The update of the downtown specific plan keeps the essentials of the original, and it doesn't include the increased in the height limit and the emphasis on housing that are still being planned. Those were held off until after the housing element was done. And now I think we need to watch for that, because changing the height of buildings downtown is going to make a huge difference. But meanwhile, the existing plan has the permit system for uses has been relaxed a little bit, with the proviso that the rules can be changed by resolution from time to time if they're not working to maintain the balance of uses downtown. The big change is the reduction of parking requirements for new businesses. And that, we're afraid, will provide an incentive for property owners to replace low intensity uses such as retail with high intensity uses such as restaurants and bars, and create a reduction in parking spaces that becomes an argument for building a parking structure at the village entrance. Mm-hmm. So on Tuesday night, we plan to argue once again for the record that this is a bad idea. A smaller but still significant problem is that the list of historic structures in the document has been reduced from 65 to 27, and references to the city's historic inventory have been removed. We'll be asking one more time for the original language to be restored. The one instance in which the Coastal Commission paid attention to us was in restoring a map of the easement oceanward of the coastal bluffs next to the Hotel Laguna that had been omitted in the updated version. One more Coastal Commission improvement is the specification that the conversion of parking spaces to other uses in the downtown must be limited and temporary, and be linked to the availability of parking. There's an 85% occupancy rate that's been calculated, and it's theoretically, according to this, if with this change, the parklets and the closing of Forest Avenue could only be temporary, and it would have to be dependent on having enough parking otherwise. So it seems as though that has some implications for closing Forest Avenue permanently. And once again, for the idea resurfacing of building a parking structure at the village entrance. So lots of things to watch for, but not much doubt about what's going to happen at the meeting tomorrow night.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm seeing a hand, phone number ending in 996. Is your hand up or is it just still up from before?
What's that?
2795, I think, is the number.
Oh, sorry, no vision. Okay, maybe that's
Oh,
just
that's me.
leftover. Oh,
Sorry, that's me. I don't know how to unraise my hand on the phone.
that's okay. We're
Good
glad you're
morning.
that's fine. We're happy to
Sorry.
have you. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, we're glad to have you. Anne?
Oh, I just wanted to say that I have a client in North Laguna. He happens to live on Bob Whalen Street. And he was writing to me about the whole parking garage issue. And he says, I don't think we should have a parking garage. I don't think it's, this is someone who's moved to town within the last couple of years. And he's now thinking about these issues, maybe for the first time. And said, I think it's out of character with the community. It's going to cause more congestion. And I don't think we should have a parking garage. And then he writes back later on and he says, he ran into Bob Whalen. He told him these things. And Bob Whalen said, well, because of the promenade, we're going to need to build the parking garage to make up for those parking spaces. So what a secret, huh?
Yeah.
Not a surprise,
No.
but terrible. Thank you. Any other questions about our two issues? The other thing I just want to remind you about is, of course, sorry, agenda item 11 tomorrow night about restricting the ability for council members to add things to the agenda. If you haven't already sent your email in, please do. We really need support to get this to go away. Oh, so sorry. Anyway, yes, Norman.
You're muted.
Unmute yourself, Norman.
Speaking of adding things to the agenda, who added item 11 to the agenda?
Should we guess that it's our city manager?
Well, we're guessing. Do we know that?
I don't know. Anybody know?
But does Bob, do you know?
No. Is George still here? I don't see George. I don't know who added it, but it's a frightening thing. It's going to just remove residents' input and city council minority input, and it's terrible.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if, for instance, if it was a particular council person. How do you find things out like that? As to where the agenda?
Verna, can you tell us? You're muted.
Can't hear you, Verna.
Verna, unmute yourself. Oh, she's working on it. It takes a minute. Go ahead.
That better?
Yeah, we hear you.
The agenda bill says that the city manager submitted it.
Big surprise.
It's the only signature on the agenda bill.
The only council member supporting it publicly so far is Blake. So I'm
Big
sure.
surprise.
Yeah, exactly right.
I hope all of us will log in tomorrow night and make a comment. And
May I
say
comment? This is Louise Thornton. George presented it to the last board council meeting. in January.
Oh, that was the version that he was supporting, which is that a city council person can,
Yes,
can
and the-
submit an agenda item, period.
And according to the staff report, it came back, the staff was directed by the city council to examine it. And they have.
George, should you speak to that?
Oh, yeah, I can speak to that. Let me just say this. I dropped off and I went to view the with my wife. She's in another room. So, and she doesn't have an audio input. So, yes, the agenda item 11 was sponsored by Sheree, which brings the point of, we know that the city manager is hired by the city council to implement city policies that are approved by the city council, but not hired to create policies that allow or disallow the council to create policies. So it's a little bit weird. It looks like to me a real power grab by the city manager, and in conjunction with Sue Kemp, who she collaborated with on this agenda item. It's clearly anti-democratic.
George,
Yeah.
may I ask you a question?
Of course, Louise, go ahead.
You and I have been debating this all day. And if
I haven't debated it with you because I have never answered your original email. I apologize for that.
I know that, George, but we've been emailing back and forth. If you just said where it came from or how it came about, it would have made a lot more sense to what you were saying.
The post I gave you had a direct link to the agenda bill.
I read it.
So it's there. It's there, and it's signed by the city manager.
I see that. I saw that, but I've seen a lot of things signed by city managers over the years.
That's correct, and that's another issue with giving that power to the city manager, because in effect, the city manager has been agendizing items for council members without their signature on them. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, in the future, I think we should be more specific. I don't quite know. Let's work on that, George.
Work on what, Louise?
Figuring out how we can phrase this so that I don't know. It just seems that
I had an editor at 40 years edit that piece that I sent out in the post. So if you had suggestions for it, there was. Also the 1968 ordinance or resolution that covered this was attached to that document. If you read it, it's a valid resolution. I don't want to debate this on this channel.
No, I don't.
So thank you.
Let's have a conversation. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Meryl. Did we get any questions in the chat?
Not any questions.
Comments?
Last one was from Deborah Lawton at 8:24, which was a minute ago. There was a 1968 rule about how agenda items are to be done. The agenda item number 11 was created by Show Ray. Please read the report. That just builds on what George was saying.
Okay, thank you. Well, for us, I think we're very concerned about residents being minimalized and not included if this sort of if the agenda item number 11 goes forward. And I think we should all, if you haven't already written an email saying please reject it, please at least appear tomorrow night at the council and say how this will be limiting residential input and council input if you are in the minority. And
I just wanted to speak a little bit as a former council member.
Thank you.
Of what I found when I was on the council. Each council member could submit an item to put on the agenda, and there was no question about it. People just If they thought they wanted something to be considered, they put it on the agenda, and Ken Frank did it, and that was not a big deal. And it wasn't done that often, but it was done when people had the need to do it. I think you need to kind of consider how the Brown Act affects how council members can function. And it's not like being a senator or on the House of Representatives, and you can go around and you can build consensus and you can talk to your fellow senators and House of Representatives people, and you can make a group of people who are supporting a certain cause and then work on it. Council members are hampered tremendously by the Brown Act. You're not allowed to do any of that. You're not supposed to be talking to more than one other council member about any particular issue. And so what happens is that the city manager can talk to all the council members. And so the city manager is kind of like the hub on the wheel, and all these communications kind of go through the city manager, and she can, interpret them as she wants to. So this measure gives the city manager even more power. And it's really alarming from that standpoint, as well as all the things that Ann Kane was talking about.
I think we all need to be very concerned about whether we want our city council to manage what goes on, or do we want our city manager to decide how Laguna Beach is being run. This is a very serious issue. And I appreciate, Ann, your comments, because this could be frightening. And we need to take action. I hope we can all send in an email that says, do not accept this item number 11. It's terrible. Other comments or questions? I don't know, I'm seeing any hands up. Louise? Lewis, I'm sorry, I can't read it. Thornton, Louise Thornton, I see your hand up. Yes, no?
It's been up for a while.
I'm sorry, it's hard to see.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute it.
Oh, that's fine.
Take it down.
Zooming is a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
But thank you for your participation. Anybody else?
I have something quick.
Mike?
Just a quick comment, by the way. I echo everything from Ann Christoph, who has, her and Vern, of course, would have the understanding of how things moved to city council from staff. I guess there's a old expression, context fixes meaning. And when I look at that agenda, Bill, I guess what I'm left with is, what are we as the public supposed to be left with in terms of how we interpret our city council and how they interpret their jobs? Some city council members think they represent people and are working to represent their constituents. Some city council members appear simply to want to be told what to do and where to line up by staff, and then to vote when the time comes. I know as a staff liaison to a city committee who frequently wondered whether staff was sitting on their programs and projects and not bringing them forward, I said, you always need to go to your council liaison to this committee, which in this case was George. He's sort of the backstop to make sure that staff is not sitting on things, or that everyone is aware of what's going on and why. So from a committee standpoint, it's also very important to know that if staff isn't moving on something, or there's a concern that staff is sitting on something intentionally, that they have the ability to go directly to a council member who's got the prerogative of agendizing something directly and bringing it directly to the public that way. And that's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Mike. I think that was really important, and I hope you'll kind of put that in some writing and send it in, because that's exactly how residents will be eliminated from the discussion if we can't go to our council person and ask them to initiate important information or questions or whatever it might be. Anybody else with a question?
And back.
I'm sorry.
I want to thank you all for this discussion because it made what George's email intended clear. And I appreciate every one of you for that kind of conversation and openness. It just plain helps. Thank you.
Oh, great. And this has been a fabulous meeting. I hope all of you enjoyed it as much as I have. The Human and Housing Committee doing such good work. And the issues coming up tomorrow night at City Council meeting that we all need to speak to. All you have to do is send an email on any of these topics, all of these topics, frankly. And then just, you call in on either Zoom or the phone and just say, I don't support agenda item 11, or how you feel about the other things. This is important to participate, and I appreciate all of your work. Anybody else for the good of the cause? All right, we're good. Thank you. Oh, Meryl.
No, just saying goodbye, everyone.
Oh, was that your goodbye? I thought it was your hello.
You
Goodbye.
say bye and I say hello.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you so
everybody.
much for your participation. It's been really good.
Great.
Great meeting.
Great
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.